Yeah, this topic is it's almost existential in like what motivates you. And what I'm going to attempt to do is just put up this little write-up I did, and doesn't oh, that's not going to work. Ah, no way. Okay. I knew I should have practiced this before I came on here. Nope, it's not going to come. So so I was in conversations with different people over the period of like weeks, and uh, I'm just going to read to you what I wrote. So, model railroading of all periods and fashions begins with the idea. The idea is cultivated over time, for some more immediate than others. The genesis is what I call an imprint. There is a person, a location, or an experience, or a combination of those that sparks some further pursuit in the hobby. And I had three imprints. One was my first Christmas in '53, when I was like a year and a half. My dad gave me the Lionel trains. My second imprint was with my grandfather telling me these stories where he met Civil War veterans, and like I was gobsmacked with some of the things he was telling me. That was about 8. And then I had this epiphany at Gettysburg for some reason when I was about 12, and it just felt like it was home. And I couldn't understand that. So I just immersed myself in the history of it, majored in it in college. And then in thinking about this conversation, I distilled this in my own little way around we choose our dream based on what we've come to believe that are what I think are the following categories. One is personal affiliation, whether it's a family member, maybe there's a local line that ran past your home, maybe there's an ancestor that was connected. And then there's the philosophical, like you have an affinity for the period or the romanticism, nostalgia, whatever you want to call it, the sentimental bucolic experience. And then the third category is around the engineering, like it's the mechanical or architectural or electrical or structural aspects that are very appealing. So for me, when I looked at my father, my grandfather in Gettysburg, it was more of the philosophical, because I had no connections to the railroads. I had no connections to the Civil War, and I certainly didn't have any DNA for engineering. So that's kind of where I've categorized these areas. And then I was thinking it'd be interesting to have a conversation with folks to see from your beginning of your affiliation, whether it's historical or modeling. Was it a personal affiliation? Was it the more the philosophical, if you will, like you had an affinity for the period, or was it the fascination of the more engineering aspects of it? So that's kind of my kickoff for this, and you got a sense of where I'm at with it. And this is just open conversation, so anybody can start or challenge anything I'm saying.
Well, Tom, I think you hit some good topics there. My interest comes from the engineering standpoint. I'm interested in how old locomotives developed, kind of like John Ott, as I found what he knows. It's absolutely fascinating. And so by starting with early locomotives, I kind of drifted into this Civil War group right here. And you all have introduced me into more of finding out the background, historical background of what was going on during that period of time. And so that's led me to start exploring North Carolina, where I live, North Carolina economy in the 1860s.
So what do you have an engineering background? Was that the draw to learn about the locomotives?
Well, I started off, I guess, with John White's book on locomotive development, which absolutely fascinated me.
Got it.
And then Dave Snyder came out with these gorgeous O-scale locomotives. And so I picked up 3 of those with no place to run them. You know, and because they were lettered WNA, Western and Atlantic, I thought, well, in North Carolina, the W can be Wilmington, because that was the only real port in North Carolina. Last port open to the Confederacy, by the way.
Right.
And when Wilmington fell, the Confederacy fell. But from Wilmington, the railroads in Wilmington sort of went north and west. But at the 1840s, 1850s, people were building railroads here, there, and yonder. And I thought, well, I don't want to call mine Western and Atlantic. I could call it Wilmington and Atlantic, but that didn't make a lot of sense because it's not going anywhere right back to the ocean. So I picked up the idea of calling it Wilmington and Albemarle, for the Albemarle Sound region of North Carolina.
Cool.
And that is an area that was underserved by railroads. It was served principally by canals at the time.
Right.
And in North Carolina, the economy suffered from the lack of a port for export. And the rivers all ran the wrong way down to South Carolina or up to Virginia. And so North Carolina was trying to find a way to funnel commerce down into Wilmington. That's what these railroads were for.
Got it.
So the Albemarle Sound region actually had a canal that carried goods up to Norfolk. It was the
Right.
Dismal Swamp Canal. I don't know if you've ever heard of that thing.
Yeah.
It was laid out by none other than good old George Washington himself back in his surveyor days. And it was dug in the late 1700s to connect the Albemarle region of North Carolina with Norfolk. And that really upset North Carolina people that the commerce of North Carolina was going to Virginia.
Got it.
So
Interesting.
hence we have the Wilmington and Albemarle Railroad, which gives me the freedom to run anything I choose and any engineering type of locomotive I think they would buy. And that's kind of how I got into this thing.
So you started off from the engineering, if we use those 3
Mhm.
categories, and then it drifted into like your location and where you live. Cool. Good. Thank you, David. Somebody? Don't be shy.
I might as well get it over with. Well, I started out with model trains when I was a kid, and the thing that got me interested in the Civil War was Disney's Great Locomotive Chase, and that kind of festered in the background till I was 19, and I got involved at Alair State Park at the railroad there, and we ran several events with the Great Locomotive Chase and reenacted that with a lot of reenactors, and that kind of cemented it, I think. And then years later, I got the news that my great-great-grandfather was in the 5th New Jersey. I didn't realize that. My cousin had all this information, and she laid it on me, and that put me over the edge. You know, so I traced his Army career, and then I got involved in Civil War reenacting, and the rest is history. So now I've incorporated it somewhat, the modeling and the reenacting and all it. Well, it's more living history than reenacting. I'm 70, so I'm not marching across battlefields anymore, so
Right.
but
So
that's it in a nutshell.
So you had the affiliation, like with your father, that was it. And then the movie, was that more of a romantic kind of draw?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. And visits to the B&O Museum, things like that, just added to it.
Right.
And then I started reading the histories. And I really enjoy, oh God, I can't remember his name now. Scott Mingus's books.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
the artist, right?
No, no. He wrote
Oh,
about the Northern Central and the the campaigns around York during the time of Gettysburg and that
Yeah.
sort of
right.
thing. Yeah,
Cool. Good. Thanks, Bill.
no problem. I'm done.
See, that wasn't so painful.
No, 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 no. I'm not a public speaker by any means, you know.
That's all right. None of us are so much.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Houston, right by my first house was by a train yard. So as a little kid, right by a yard throat. So the locomotives were always coming, steam engines would be coming right to the end and back, and we were like where they would come out before they, redid stuff. So I got to see a lot of engineers. They'd throw us chalk, we'd put pennies on the rail, all that kind of thing. And then, so my first thing was train. I loved counting cars because back we were so close to train yards, we'd constantly be stopped for trains, and you could count them and so on. And but I've also always I can't even remember when I started loving the Civil War. And my dad did a residency in New York. Our family was in Texas, so we'd go across country. And because that, we got stopped at Chattanooga, and he'd have a stop at various battlefields. So I got a collection of little toy guns and cannons and soldiers and all that kind of thing from a kid. And yeah, I just took a quick look for it. I can't find. I got a picture of me with one of my first train sets for my grandpa when I must have been like 5 years old. And started out as just like a Lionel thing, and then did HO. Right now I'm in an apartment, so I don't got any room, so I'm doing in scale. But as I get into psychology, I love thinking, okay, everything has a reason from something. So just to portray, like when I first got in this group, like where does everything evolve to and from? Like in a sense, how did a caboose evolve? What were the rules about lights? The whole way the switches are done. I've been fascinated with the stub switches as opposed to the kind they have now and so on. And to find origins. And so also I like on my layout having lots of people, and pretty much everybody on my layout, I'll have a lot, but everybody has a story that's there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so now I love the animation when you can make the animation work and have as much as I can fit in.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so now it's almost more animation as far as what I focus on, but history. I just found it the other week, by the way, like on log cars, I found out when they chain the logs down, the top one was put without the chain, so that would keep tension on it. Because if you just straight chain them, they settle down and wiggle around, and next thing you know, they'll fall out. But if you put one out of the chain on top center, then it keeps the chains tight. The brilliance of especially narrow gauge and stuff like that in early days when they just got a problem and they'd figure it out somehow. I love celebrating the mind working well like that.
Right. So I'm hearing for you, it's first it was the affiliation because there was a line near you,
Yeah.
and then the whole engineering mechanical elements of it that was appealing.
Yeah. Well, and just Civil War history.
The history.
And why, as a little kid, I didn't care about why. I was always bored. I always skip on the books to start. Let's start at Fort Sumter. When I got older and more psychological, then, okay, why did the war start? And that's a huge thing that's totally off topic for this group. But I find that more interesting. What do you do? Why? The big why questions. As a kid, I just wanted tactics and stuff like that. Right. And stories.
Well, when I think about our past Zooms and the questions that you ask, you always have that curiosity about you, where it came from, how does it work, and things like that. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Thank you, Walter.
Well,
Go, John.
I'm done.
Michael.
I'm not sure if I can get this thing off mute or not.
You got it.
Oh, good. I'm more engineering, I think. I like history. My grandfather was an engineer in a Delaware and Hudson, so that was a little bit, but that was diesel age by the time I figured out what he was doing. I do like history, museums. Then when I was in the service, I wound up for about a year at Gettysburg teaching history of part of the battles. So that really stepped up a lot. Scott Mingus is one of the gentlemen I talked to. and a few professors from Penn State. So that kind of got me into that. And I think for a while when I was young, we lived in a place with a lot of reenactors down in New York, New Jersey. So that was a fairly good influence to me. But the engineering and hoping I can get these things to roll is one of my goals. So thank you.
You have, what locomotives are you using?
I'm using the Winnan Camel.
Oh,
Who
Yeah,
makes
we
that?
my club is a 3-rail organization, and I have a Winnan Camel here. If you let me duck under my desk, I might have the box.
Absolutely. Who made the 3-wheel Winans? Is that Lionel?
Oh, that would have been SMR.
Williams.
SMR. Oh, right.
Camels have always fascinated me. They're so different.
Oh, yeah.
There's not much of a picture of this thing I can get here, I guess.
Yeah, you got your virtual. But that's an SMR model, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And since
They're
I like you guys so much, I'll go through the 47 pieces of foam that come with it. I would have been prepared had I thought about this.
That's right. I think between Charlie and seeing Schneider's stuff, we got a good idea how they look.
Okay, that's invisible. That's cool. I didn't know that would
Yeah.
do that. But actually, it's a very good runner, and a lot of people like seeing it, so I'm quite pleased with it. And I've been working on cars. Mostly they are the scratch built ones. But other than that, I'm just having a lot of fun. Although I have to admit, I painted about 30 Union Army figures. And you think I could find those guys? No way. I don't know where I put them. So,
Do you have pop hoppers?
excuse me?
Do you have pop hoppers to run with that?
Some that I'm putting together, yes. I have a lot of artillery, but like I said, I lost all my troops. So it's a bit of a
Deserves.
setback.
Cool. Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Could you hold the engine up in front of you because it kind of got blotted when you moved it away from your body there?
I don't know if you're going to be able to see it because he's got a virtual background.
Well,
That's why I said if you held it in front of him. maybe.
Oh.
if you hold it in front of your mouth.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. Beautiful.
I don't see it.
Right there.
I see Bill and Tom.
Mike, say something.
I think there I am.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
You guys might have your viewing screen on for speaker instead of gallery.
I have no idea. The only time I get to use this is when I'm talking with you guys, so I don't get to practice too much.
That's not on. That has more to do with the viewer than you, Mike.
But
Yeah.
this is a nice runner. It really does well. Hauls those cars around. It's got some sound to it. Very dependable so far. You know, can't
That's
put a million
great.
miles on them, but they're
Beautiful.
Very nice. Who's up?
So, I was born and raised in Alexandria, Virginia, and so surrounded by that stuff.
Mm.
And I don't know, I spent as much time as I could in DC at the museums there. And when I was a kid, the Arts and Industries Museum at the Smithsonian had their 1876 centennial replica stuff on display. So that really appealed to me. All the pinstripe machinery, really liked that. And when I first got my driver's license, the first place I went was the B&O Museum in Baltimore. So I've always liked the 19th century steam. And yeah, I guess that's the background for me.
So for you, it was the affiliation. There was you were immersed in it locally.
Yeah, locally and just being able to actually see the stuff that was available or locally at the time, that you could actually go into the museum and see uh, steam engines with pinstripes and all of the models that they had in the locomotive hall at the American History Museum. That the museums in general have always appealed to me. I work in a museum now, so.
So would it be, let's see, so you had initially affiliation. It doesn't sound like the engineering and mechanical is of much interest, but the color, the size, the drama of it. So it's more like,
Yeah,
right,
yeah. The time period. I mean, it's almost alien compared to now. I mean, having a machine that's that decorated and having pinstripes on something that nobody except the operator is going to see it. It's really amazing.
right. Cool. Thank you, Andy.
Sure.
Oh, I'll take a swing at it. Are we reintroducing ourselves again, Tom, or are we just moving
No.
on? Everybody knows everybody.
Everybody knows.
All right, good. I started very young. My dad had a layout in the basement of my first memories, which, Tom, I was up in New Jersey in Montvale. And so we had a control at our hands very young, along with a dad who said, don't touch that one, don't touch that one. Okay. And we didn't, and had a good time. And as a result, ultimately, I now own it all that we've had through all the years. Always wanted to get back to it. My dad and I were reapproaching it with the Civil War approach. I've been researching the Civil War most of my adult life. I've been to as many battlefields as I can get to, as far west as Wilson Creek, and all over Virginia for sure, because I like to spend a lot of time there. And I finally am getting back into it the past 5 years,
Right,
and been able to solidify plans
right,
for layouts and what I want, what I'm going to be happy with. You know, I like the River Rosies. They're larger for everybody else. That's fine. They work for me. DC let me know that the Mantua cars are a good size fit with them. And so I've matched those up and honed my whole collection in that direction. And right now I'm in the process of building about 10 rebuilding 10 Mantua boxcars into radial roof boxcars with US MRR livery, i.e. tin, brown, and black bottoms.
Mhm.
And it's going well, moving along fine. We'll be presenting later on about that process as well.
So it sounds like the origin for you was initially the imprint of your father,
You
and
better
then
believe it.
with the Civil War. I mean, I've got in the beginning the genesis of these thoughts came from the three categories that I looked at from the motivational source: personal affiliation, philosophical, or engineering. Clearly, you and I are not in the engineering camp. But when
Yeah.
you start talking about the Civil War, would you say there was a romanticism or nostalgic aspect to that for you? That's why.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Get the like being a theater teacher, the language used in the writing from the time period appealed to me tremendously.
Mm.
You know, they lines such as behind its colors, the regiment grandly moved forward, despite, shock and shell.
Right. 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 Right.
Anybody would, I mean, today, the thought of somebody writing that down, it's like, okay, what's wrong with you?
Right. Right.
But back then, there were men who could put that, who understood the in between the lines of what those words meant. You know, all those guys, the veterans and things, yeah, they moved great through, but they also remember the splattering of the brains and the blood and the breaking of bones and everything else, and the cries of men dying in their last agonies of those moments. The words mean more, and you need to put that in between the lines. At first romantic, and once I got onto the battlefields, that was swept away like canister swiped away half of a regiment.
Right.
You know, when you began to realize what they had to crawl over and walk through, and
Right.
that it's a little bit different. It's a little more human.
Yep. Cool. Good. Thank you, Roger.
Certainly.
I may fall into all three categories in some aspect. So I started off, actually was a pretty decent artist in high school. And so I started off and spent 2 years in college studying architecture, and was involved in art, and I always liked, as I was growing up, building models. So I built model cars and model tanks, and would go to all the trouble of detailing them, that kind of thing. And so that combination of, in fact, there are times where I think I actually enjoy that part more than that. You asked me one time, are you going to run ops on it? And it's like, no, it's the building and the artistry that goes into it. And so there was that kind of a thread, but I always enjoyed history. I mean, from very early on, I remember being mesmerized by Bruce Caton's series on the Civil War, This Hollow Ground. If you've read that whole entire series, it just mesmerized me again in that same kind of poetry, the way he writes.
Right.
And as I got older and then switched my major, much to the regret of my parents, from something that had the potential to earn money to you're going to get a degree in history. So they weren't really happy. It's like, you make so much more money. But anyways, but then I got my degree in history. And became fascinated with the Civil War, in as much as it's one of those points in history that sort of demarcates how we became. There are a couple of really good books that talk about Civil War memory and how the Civil War plays continuing on as the United States has evolved. It's out of the Civil War that it was and the engines and the technology of the era were, I mean, comparable to, I mean, and it's, when I talk to my students in class, I always remind them, I grew up in a time when television changed from black and white to color. It was an amazing feat. Those technological advancements. And so I can truly appreciate historically the advancements that rail had. And then kind of associated with that was that whenever we went on a family trip, we always ended up we hated driving by historic landmarks because my father would pull off and stop. And so we would always, I mean, we may have been heading down to go to Disney World in Florida, but on the way, we stopped at Andersonville, and we would make all these. And so, and that had an impression on me because he really always talked to me about the human beings. I mean, I remember standing at Gettysburg and standing at the high water mark and him pointing out to the fields and saying, can you imagine what it would have taken a man to step into that field, knowing that in all probability, that may be the last thing they ever do? What would cause somebody to do that? So I was that part of the humanistic. So at a certain point in time, and I'm not sure when, that it was like this artistic model building, and how do I become in this interest in the technology of the period and what it meant to the United States, and from a historical standpoint. And it's like, well, if I'm going to build models, what's the best way to take my model and artistry and connect it to another interest and sort of double up on it? And so it was like, well, and I'd always played around and built models for the boys, and we did the whole all the race cars, the Pinewood Derby cars, and all that sort of stuff with models. Well, I built them a small layout in the rec room, And they did a lot more than just play with the trains on it. So it was sort of like this diorama that they get around with. So that was always sort of like in the back of my mind. And it was like, you know what, I think I'm going to shift my model making to focus specifically on the railroads and a railroad layout, and do all the modeling and bring that, because as I've talked before, I'm fascinated by the research and finding those little bits and pieces that sort of pull you into that period of time. Little things like, I remember Al making some comment one time about, don't forget the outhouses. And I'm like, oh, I'd never thought about that before, but I actually had an opportunity to stay with my great grandparents when I was small, and they didn't have indoor plumbing, and they lit their house with kerosene lamp. I mean, this is when I was in the early 60s. We would eventually bring water and power and all that to their home, but yeah, they lived as you would have lived at the turn of the century.
Wow.
So it's like I remember the outhouse, their property, but all those kind of things that it's like, you know, I'm fascinated when I read catalogs of all the ads, of all the things that people were purchasing, and then thinking and reflect on, you know, that was something that at that time, those people thought that, the individuals that were in that era, that was the most fascinating and amazing cutting edge piece of technology that existed at the time. Right. And today we look back on it and can't really fathom that people could have lived that way. And it's like 100 years from now, what will they look at? What will cell phones appear to that generation? But yeah, that's kind of a crisscrossing of a lot of different interests. I'm able to read Civil War histories. I'm able to now dive in deeper and understand the logistics of the war and those sort of things. And that's always fascinating, and going through archives and archival research keeps me connected to that history piece. And then as I'm building, and I'm actually now painting the backdrop, I've sort of rekindled that ability to paint and get back in it. We'll see when I get it done whether I actually recaptured the ability to paint again. But I'm playing around, and so it's kind of brought all that together.
Yeah, it's clearly you have the imprint, but what I'm hearing mostly, that the theme throughout what you're saying is the stories and the richness of all of that.
Yep.
And the engineering is fascinating, but I think it's part of the context of the experience of the times. And that's, yeah, I get that. That's pretty much where I live. That's cool. Thank you, Ron.
Yep.
I guess I can add a little. I've always had an interest in the Civil War. I fell off a cannon at Gettysburg when I was 6 years old, and I say I really did fall off a cannon at 6. I was talking to my mom about that the other day, and she says, "Oh, I remember that." So I've always had an interest in the Civil War. I did some wargaming when I was younger. So that was the Civil War part. The train part, I'm not so sure of. I live down the street from Boston and Main line. It's, I don't know what it is now, Guilford or Pan Am Railways or something. But I guess that maybe started me on the railroad thing. And so it kind of, when I built my first railroad, it was just kind of an ad hoc thing. And I didn't really like that. And I wanted to have a focus and a history, and also I figured out modern railroads take vast amounts of space. And the Civil War, I could focus on just a small area and basically do a diorama type approach that recreated a city point. But that's part of it. The other thing is I get bored easily. So I like learning new things. And so I've been fooling around with the electronics part of it, but the history part of it fascinates me too. You know, you read the Bruce Catton books and all that, and you think of all these soldiers and wagons and stuff, but then you see these pictures of City Point, and they got steam engines, and they got running water, and they've got, you know, basically very sophisticated operation going on. But the thing that really fascinates me is trying to understand the people, because I've just recently retired after 40 years in software engineering, most of that time as a manager. And people are so, you know, leaders that are successful are not easy people to deal with. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, when I'm young, you have these heroes, whether it be, you know, Stonewall Jackson or, you know, General Grant or whoever. But they're real people with real faults, and how they become successful and why they're successful is fascinating. But also, so just, you know, learning about how these people really operated, how the people under them responded, because I think a lot of these history books are kind of filtered, and you kind of see the best of these people or the worst of these people. You don't really see the person. So I've been learning a lot about some of the people, reading some of that log I posted about the issue at City Point, on the City Point and Army Line Railroad, where to put the station, and all the arguments going back and forth between the Army and the railroad. It's kind of funny. And actually, I've got a lot more. I'm actually writing a small book that talks about those 30 days where they built that extension of that line, and what happened, what really happened. There's a lot more to it than what that I found out after I made those postings on the email list. So
Cool.
So just learning. The bottom line is I love learning new things. And like when Bernie was talking about putting his telegraph in his model railroad, now I'm like diving down into telegraphs. I'm trying to learn how to do the American Morse code, and I might actually buy myself a telegraph set and hook it up to my railroad, a real one. And then, you know, and then there's a spin on it. Since I had the computer knowledge, I might be able to computerize it, have the original set and hook it in with a computerized set, so people won't have to learn American Morse code to operate it. So anyway, I'm all over the place. So.
Well, you're having fun, and it sounds like you know, given the engineering background, but the whole storyline, and I resonate with your point about leaders and what motivates them. That's kind of like my line of work, and that I find that fascinating too, is how they made decisions, how they felt so committed to their convictions and what they were willing to withstand in order to like make something happen.
And how they got people to follow their lead, because not everybody, you know, not everybody will follow the lead. Like when I'm finding out on the City Point thing, I'm focused on the very tail end of that episode at City Point, and the morale and the troops and stuff is unbelievably high. They're convinced they're going to win. There's no question.
Right.
And it just, of course, nobody writes about that part of the history of the Civil War, but it's amazing how strongly, you know, the conviction is that it's just a matter of time, and the Confederates, they don't have a chance, you know.
Yeah.
But how that army, you know, morphed itself between the time Grant took over and the end of the war is like, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, you know, there's a theme with what you and Ron, I think some others are saying, in terms of the fascination about how all those things came about. And to realize that they needed to be inspired. And I think it's fascinating for us to look at how they took some of these ideas and made some things happen that was just remarkable for the times. That's one of the stimulating elements of it for me too.
Well, and I think we vastly underestimate their capabilities and the technology they were dealing with.
Right.
I mean, the last few miles, okay, they got horse and wagons and on foot, But you read World War II histories and a lot of the soldiers will say, well, we walked across France. So,
Right, right, right. That's good. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'll go next. So for me, the train part was from my father, probably like a lot of us. And I grew up in New York, and he was probably more interested in New York Central and electrification kind of thing, GG1s,
Oh,
steeples,
yeah.
some Long Island Railroad steam, things that he probably saw when he was growing up. And it probably would have been a lot cheaper if that's what I followed, but I didn't. So then when I graduated from college, I moved out in California in the Bay Area, San Francisco area. And I remember going to Stanford, a friend of mine was there, and we saw the Governor Stanford. And I don't think it was on display yet. There's a museum, it's still there, that it's obviously the locomotives moved, but where they kept all of Stanford's personal things. And I think that's where it was, but it was a long time ago. And it was a little like Andy, I think, said, it was the art and the engineering that I don't think it was really restored yet. I mean, it's beautiful in Sacramento now. But when you just saw all the little details and how, everything would, right? How everything worked. And it just amazed me and fascinated me. And then I had a chance and I went up to Sacramento and saw some of the early steam up there as well. And then eventually Reno, see the VNT. I've never been in a lot of the East Coast museums, other than except for the Smithsonian. I haven't really been to yet. There's still time. And I just got so interested in the art and the engineering of it. Oh, and of course, another big one was seeing the replica engines out in Utah. And I just got so fascinated with the engineering part of it. And I actually went to school in upstate New York, near Schenectady, right? And I had no idea that that they made steam locomotives there. I had no idea when I was going to school there. And I just got so fascinated with the history and the how these industries developed, and through you guys, I get more of an appreciation for the East Coast and for the Civil War part of it. But it's really, for me, the early engineering and how they made them very functional, but also took a lot of pride and they're beautiful. I mean, when you saw the train go down the line, this was the front of the line. And it wasn't just the trains, the cars. I mean, in San Francisco, the Carter brothers, they made all the flat cars and the passenger cars used, and just the whole industries that moved around that. And also the stories, I guess it's like a lot of us, one thing leads to the other. Tunneling and how they, especially out here in the Sierra Nevadas, you talked about people, right? They getting a work crew to do that. And how they managed to tunnel through the Sierra Nevadas. And it wasn't just that. I mean, later on, the Santa Cruz Mountains out here, and to get all the timber and all that out, just all the history of how the engineering developed for whenever there's a problem, they found a solution for it. And I was reading about the Santa Cruz Mountains out here, the railroads. They would have, one of the reasons why it was abandoned, or probably other reasons, but it would get washed out periodically. And they didn't, at the time, that wasn't a big deal because they made so much money. If they got washed out, they just hired 100 people in San Francisco and rebuilt it. It wasn't a big deal. They were making so much money doing this. And also, like the stories that you say, again, because it's fresh in my mind, because I went to this talk last week about the railroads in Santa Cruz Mountains. There are a lot of, how do I say, like little holiday places or camps or something there. And that evolved from the railroads they had, that they not only wanted the railroad to be functional, but they had little places that you'd stop along the way and you'd have a bite to eat or enjoy the scenery or something like that, because they wanted the people to enjoy the railroad, because they thought it'd bring more business to it. So maybe it's a little like you're saying too, the previous contributors, that it's also the people and the stories about it that are totally fascinated. And they didn't, they just, in those early days, they just, saw the opportunity and they just, threw whatever money and resources they could. In fact, an early story about Stanford it's known as the Cardinals now. At the time, well, this goes back before me, but they were asking them, the students what they wanted to call what they wanted the motto, the mascot to be for the school. And the students are very smart. They said robber barons, but the university wouldn't accept that. Even back then, they knew that, you know, Stanford made his money using other people's money, using government money. So, and just those stories just fascinate me.
Right.
Of the early days of railroading. So,
Cool. That's not, yeah, again, the stories, I see these themes coming up. That's good. Thank you, Vince.
oh, and like the C.P. Huntington, I'm sure you guys, you know,
Yeah.
see that and model it. I had no idea there was a time that it was used in San Francisco as kind of like for the streetcars, right? Before there was electrification, they had steam. I had no idea. And then I picked up this book by, I think it was University of San Francisco professor wrote, and they showed the C.P. Huntington, you know, and it's all the things that you learn.
Right.
So,
Yep. Yep. That the learning, that's another attractive aspect about that.
and there was another one, just one last anecdote, when they were tunneling through the Santa Cruz Mountains. Apparently there's oil there, so, but not enough. There's a little bit, but part of that is you get a lot of gas. And as they're tunneling, they would encounter gas. And even the Chinese at some point, I don't mean this derogatory, but the Chinese were very professional at the time. They said, look, you pay us, we'll work hard, but you have to know what you're doing. We won't do this if you don't know what you're doing. And they were like tunneling through mountains, exposing, you know, gas and have explosions. And somehow they managed to get through it all. But in the mountain, the tunnels are now more or less sealed because they don't want, that's part of the, but they usually had put wooden bracing, not here. It was all brickwork because they, you know, they have gas even after they started using the tunnel. It just would vent through. So just all these little stories that you hear. It's just amazing.
Nice. Very cool. Thank you.
Have you ever read The Octopus by Frank Norris? It's written in the 1890s, I think. It's about railroad, or the Southern Pacific Railroad in Central California. It's really an interesting
Okay.
book.
Yeah, I'll look that one up. But there's so many stories. I mean, like, who would have thought I mean, you know, maybe you don't know the Santa Cruz Mountains that well, but I would say it's like well, bigger than the Catskills, but maybe it's, you know, or the Poconos or something, somewhat, if you live in the area, somewhat famous. But who would have thought there was this he was like a mini robber baron that saw all the lumber there and said, we have to have a way to get it out of the mountains. Unfortunately, he was successful. He logged the mountains, but you know, how do we get it out? And he didn't care. He just saw the opportunity and just plowing money into it. Fortunately, he had the money, and just all these little stories. So I will look up The Octopus as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Vince.
Oh, one thing, if I just piggyback on loving engineering, when they built when they finally, okay, it's a little bit later, but think, how would you do this back then? At the beginning of the 1900s, when they're going to dig the underneath the tunnel to get to Staten Island, at either end they had these huge rings that are like 22 tons, and they would just put stakes in and, you know, and like, you know, jack them forward, and you have sand and rock, and of course you're in the middle of the river and so on. When they met, they were a quarter of an inch off.
Right.
Try that one.
Right.
Back then, no lasers, you know, that I still can't get over that.
Right. Cool. Who's up?
Oh, I'll get mine over with.
Oh, gotta hear yours, John.
Oh, it's not that terribly interesting. I had very indulgent parents. And in the early 60s, you guys probably know and remember, there was a lot of public interest in the Civil War. And on one trip to the bookstore, my mom and dad got me a little kid's book on the Civil War. Big mistake. And then at about the same time, we moved to a house that was about 100 yards from the Pacific coastline, the Southern Pacific coastline, which in the 60s was a very busy railroad. and I was fascinated by the trains. And their response to that was to get me an HO train set.
Wow.
So before I was even self-aware of anything going on, I was immersed in Civil War books and model railroads. And I guess it's a tribute to a lack of personal development, but I've stayed in that mode ever since.
Big influence.
After I got trained as an illustrator, is when I realized I had a propensity to go and research things in depth. Because one of the selling points I had as an illustrator, as a science illustrator, is, well, you got it accurate. Whatever it is that I draw, it's going to be accurate. And so I got into the habit of researching everything myself, not depending on other people's research. And that's carried over both to my Civil War hobby and my railroading hobby. Just collecting every scrap of information that I can find for future reference. And there's been I can see a distinct continuity going back many, many, many years where I just developed habits that I never changed.
Yeah, and that's why it goes back to the imprint thing I have. It's like, you know, when you're young, certain things just like blam. And depending upon, I mean, parents are clearly a strong influence. Yeah, I get it. Wow. Well, count the blessings on that one. Glad you had indulgent parents, as I did.
Yeah, well, the golden age of discovery is always when you're 10.
Right. Well, I think I'm 11. Thank you. Who do we have left here? Yes, Mr. Bob.
Hey, well, first of all, are you hearing me okay?
Yep.
Yes, Sean.
I just changed the internet connection because it was breaking up. So I think it's an improvement. So when I was about 5 years old, Santa brought me an American Flyer train set around the Christmas tree. Santa, who I didn't realize was Dad, didn't like 3-rail trains, so we had American Flyer until I was in high school, when it was time to go into HO. Now, when I was a kid, walking, I live in the Detroit, Michigan area and have my whole life. And I grew up about 4 blocks from the Grand Trunk Western main line, running from Detroit to Pontiac to Durand. And when I was walking to kindergarten, had to walk under the tracks under a viaduct. And I knew that if I got there right when one of the commuter trains was going across the tracks, I thought that was great. And I also knew that I wasn't going to be late for school. And of course, at that time, those commuter trains were pulled by steam. And they continued to be pulled by steam until I was in high school. And boy, I remember, like somebody said, playing around on the tracks, putting pennies on the tracks, for the last steam engine to run over. And what putting pennies on the tracks got me was my one and only ride in the backseat of a police car. So that career didn't last long. But my interest in 19th century railroading is probably because parents like museums, and I went to the Ford Museum in Dearborn since I was a kid and looked at the exhibits that they had of 19th century equipment. So when we did go to HO, I saved up my money and bought myself a Mantua General when I was maybe a sophomore in high school. I would consider myself, I guess, interested in the engineering end of things. I'm interested in 19th century railroads in general, and I'm interested in the railroads of the Civil War era, more so than the war itself, I guess.
Mhm.
Although, for a while when I was working, I had a cubicle, of course, and the guy in the cubicle in front of me was a reenactor.
Ah.
And the guy in the cubicle behind me was a reenactor. And the guy in front was a Southerner, and the guy in back was a Northerner. And I felt like I was living on the Mason-Dixon line for the whole time. I model HO, but I have been sort of dipping my toe in the water of O scale. And if I can share a video, we'll see it. That's an if. If I can share a short video, I will show you my entire roster. So now, when I go to share screen, I think there's a couple of things I should click so that videos come through nicely.
Well, is your video in a file or is it already on your like desktop or on your?
It is on the desktop and
Okay.
opened, paused.
Hit share screen and that should show up in one of your options.
Okay, but as I recall, yeah, here's optimize for video clip. So we'll do that. And let's try this, see if we get this.
Wow.
Are you seeing this?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, so this is O scale. This sits on my 3-foot piece of O scale flex track, which is all that I have. This is the William Mason, sold by Max Gray, made by KTM. And I bought it because I liked it. And I actually hadn't had it out of the box in 10 years or so, and I remembered it not running well, but actually it runs pretty well. So this is, yeah, 16 seconds. So this is not very long. But one thing to notice is this area here, because one very cool feature of this locomotive is that it has working Stevenson valve gear.
Oh, man.
The camera works a little shaky because I'm holding my phone in one hand and trying to run the power pack in the other. So bear with me. There we go.
Oh my
Valve
gosh,
gear
look
there.
at that. Wow. Look at that, Stevenson. That's crazy cool.
Yeah,
Don't let Charlie Taylor see that. He's going to make you an offer you can't refuse. That is beautiful. Wow. I never even heard of that company.
Yeah, Max Gray was a big importer in the 60s and 70s, some HO, mostly O scale. Their main builder was called KTM, that was considered to be one of the better, one of the better Japanese makers.
Cool.
Now, of course, this is a model of the William Mason, not as it was built, but as it is in the B&O Museum.
Right.
And I assume that as built, it would have had a straight boiler and looked like, looked like a Mason.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And I figured I would paint this up. And since it is a model of the 20th century version of the William Mason, I thought I would paint it up as the William Mason appeared in the museum for 50 years or so in a paint job, mostly Indian red. I've got Champ decals for it. But something I wondered is whether, is how much it looks like. I mean, it doesn't look like a Mason as built, but does it look like something else? Could I pass this off as a U.S. military railroad locomotive, for example, because it resembles something on their roster? I haven't tried to research that, but it's a question that I wonder about.
Well, it's, yeah, John, oh, John's nodding yes.
Okay, okay. Well, we may have to talk about that. The other half of my motive power roster for O scale is a River Rossi Genoa 440, which is a plastic kit.
Yep.
And I have a motorizing kit for it from Northwest Shortline. It's got a pretty small motor, so I don't think it'll be much of a, won't haul much. But from John's talk about 2 meetings ago, maybe, I didn't realize there were Baldwins on the U.S. Military Railroad roster. And I wonder also if that could pass off for one of those.
Yeah, I could see another clinic down the pike with you sharing the painted version, and maybe after a conversation with John to get some additional input. That's cool. Thank you, John.
Okay, so there is that. We'll be done here. Okay.
Just got to click stop share.
I have lost. Oh, there it is. Okay. Stop share.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a couple of SMR freight cars to pull behind it. He was having a sale on 3-rail versions, so that's what I got, and I'll convert them to 2-rail.
Beautiful. Get them done in about a month, and I got a slot for you. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, I
That's
still
good.
haven't finished my boxcar build project from a year ago.
That's all right. This time. Who? Anybody else? Did we get? I think we're missing Phil. Did you?
No, I didn't present yet. All right. Well, I'll go ahead. So yeah, I got my first train set. I didn't hear the question because I joined late, but I'm kind of guessing.
Well, I'm going to help you out here. So in looking at, the origin, like where was the motivation? What was the source? It's what I was playing with is that it could be a personal affiliation, like a family member. Maybe there was a local line near you or an ancestor that was affiliated, even with the Civil War or railroads. It could be just you enjoy the storylines behind it, the romanticism, there's some nostalgic aspect, or you're a real engineering kind of guy, like the mechanics and the architecture and all of that.
Okay. Well, I guess the real origin was that, I got a train set when I was 5 and it just kind of, it stuck. I don't know why.
Imprint. It's imprint.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, after a long time, not really knowing what I wanted to do, I eventually graduated college and someone told me to maybe consider modeling pre-1900 or early rail. And I got into researching it and eventually picked up a book on the Santa Fe. And so that's kind of what led me to model the Santa Fe. I thought that it was interesting that the Santa Fe was the first transcontinental railroad that was not controlled by the Southern Pacific financial interests. So they were kind of the underdog and really trying to break that monopoly. I thought that was a neat story. And then I'm also really interested in like timetable and train order operation. Yeah. Scratch building, and doing like the historical research and finding out, hey, I've actually found some pictures that, I guess nobody knew about, at least nobody in the model railroad community. So it's always fascinating to find that. And I'm like, I'm the only person that knows this is even exists. So
that's cool. Yeah.
So that's really, scratch building and timetable and train order, and also steam locomotives are probably the main interests there.
So there's storylines about that really fascinate you, and how all those components come together in a contextual vision for you, if you will. Yeah.
And it's kind of about challenging myself too, to build things myself and find information that I need, and use the more complicated dispatching system. So
Right. Yep. I was on one of those trains the other night, and yeah, I'll stay with waybills for the time being. Cool. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, welcome.
That it? Finito? Yeah, we got everybody? Okay. Cool. Wow. So I was just curious, how does this resonate? I mean, how are you feeling about it? What are you observing? What are you hearing in terms of people's sharing of the beginning of their interest in this era?
Well, one thing I seem to notice, but it might just be because of my prejudice, historical research, it sounds like everybody loves.
Yeah, that's good, Walter. Yeah. So for me, it's like, there is I guess that would fall into the category of nostalgia. There's something really appealing about that era that causes us to want to learn and know more. And then to be able to represent it in something three-dimensional that we can have fun with, so it appeals to that youthful connection that we have as well. And so ultimately it's the model railroad, which all of you are working on, I know, diligently. And you'll each be slotted for your own Zoom Meet presentation throughout the year. Yeah, cool. Something that, and it's funny, DC sent me a note while Vince was talking about going on, and some of you were talking about the museums, but when Vince was talking, I thought, you know what? We're considering doing our annual meet this year. And we were supposed to go to Baltimore last year. And then, Charlie has been, in a very polite, humble way, trying to lobby for Memphis. And you don't have to say anything now, but and DC, you can chime in. We're just curious as to, what appeals to you. And I'll probably send out an email later on this week to the whole group to see if we can find, some kind of compass reading on where to go.
Could I get some feedback from the guys tonight on on a lot of when we have our conventions, a lot of what we do focuses on specifically Civil War. However, I know from like one of the thrills that a number of members got was riding in an engine on a turntable. I was wondering to what degree, if we had a convention, that the prototype related activities would revolve around a more modern time period. What are you guys' feelings on that? Yes, no, apathetic?
Whatever we decide.
By more modern, you mean keeping it in the 1800s or even going past there?
Well, I've been lobbying personally for something around Long Branch, New Jersey.
Ah, there you go.
I think it'd be great to get the whole group of people who are really into the Civil War to operate on Tom's layout.
I did not pay him for this. There's nothing in it. I mean, this is like a little blindside for me.
Got my vote.
What's that,
Yeah,
Bill?
I say you got my vote.
but be
I do.
careful, guys. If you show up there, you're gonna have to do something to the railroad, okay?
Oh,
Because
no, no.
Tom's not gonna let you go.
I save that for particular people, Roger.
No,
My
I'm joking.
special guests.
Now, he's very generous when you're there. You would love it.
You see as much rail cleaner as you can use.
Well, I think the best thing, you know what I'll do, DC? I will put that as an option to the group. You know, when I send out the email, people can ponder that. The only reason I lean towards something like Memphis is because it's a little further west, and for those that are in the west, it might be a little bit more appealing to get to. And the thing about, I really like going to a place where we can operate, so I'd be glad to throw my hat in the ring on that. But that's one reason I'm kind of leaning to either Baltimore or Memphis, because those two layouts are a blast to operate. And then, you know, by perchance, you know, Ron's layout might be finished by then. And then
I would definitely have you go to work.
right, I know.
We'd be working on the railroad.
If I was living near you, I'd be over there until you have to kick me out, brother, for sure.
There you go.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
you know, the thing that would be, it doesn't, I mean, I'm all in on Memphis. I can go back there anytime, you know, I love Charlie's layout but I guess in terms of just thinking about things, any place that we go that would have access to things that are, you know, the 19th century, that, you know, even if it's not directly railroad, I'm building houses and I'm building sawmills, and I'm building, I mean, all these kits. And so I'm good with that. I mean, so even coming to New Jersey, I'm sure there are places that there are historical areas where we could go to that would be the 19th century. Obviously, New Jersey was here with the founding of the country. So there's a lot of history there. And, you know, taking in that engineering from that period, because that's one of the things right now I'm really trying to figure out is how did they do things? How did they build things? What did they use? I've got all these paint charts so that it's like, well, I don't want to pick, I want to pick paints that reflect what was available in the 19th century, those sort of things. And any exposure to that kind of information in museums is really, I find it interesting. So there's some flexibility, at least from my perspective, that it doesn't necessarily have to be someplace where we can go to a Civil War battlefield.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much, I think, has been the one of the criteria for the locations, is that there's some 19th century elements. So whether it's architecture or engineering or railroads or, you know, some aspect of the history. Yep. Cool. Good. All right, gentlemen, anything anybody wants to ask or offer before we end the recording? All righty.